The clinking of forks against plates filled the eerie silence that had settled over our Wednesday night dinner. I stared across the table at Rowan, my husband of 6 years, searching his face for any hint of the loving man I had married. But his eyes avoided mine as he shoveled pasta into his mouth with unusual urgency. My gaze drifted to his phone lying next to his plate. A notification blinked tauntingly, as though begging me to swipe it open. Against my better judgment, I surrendered to temptation. Rowan didn't even notice as I leaned over and thumbed the unlock code. His acting skills had become that convincing. The message glared at me like a lurid accusation. "Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Meet at our place in an hour?" The sender's name, Marcella. I read it again, my heart thudding as the words burrowed into my consciousness like shards of broken glass. So this is why he'd been distant lately, coming home late without explanation, his attention continuously wandering to whatever sordid thoughts consumed his mind. "Everything okay, honey?" Rowan asked, snapping me out of my daze with that perfectly innocent tone he'd perfected over God knows how long. I slid his phone across the table, unable to find any words. His eyes went wide as his mask finally slipped, allowing a flash of panic to streak across his face. In that moment, I realized the man I thought I knew had been an illusion all along. "Alara, I can explain," he started, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't bother," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and rage. "Just tell me one thing. How long has this been going on?" Rowan opened his mouth and closed it again, his shoulders slumped in apparent resignation. 6 months, he finally admitted, the words landing like a kick to my gut. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deception while I blissfully carried on, tending to our home and planning a future with a man who had already checked out of our marriage. "Who is she?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. Marcella, the beautiful 20-something interior designer that had worked on a project in Rowan's office. He let out a bitter chuckle. "Does it really matter? She's someone who made me feel things I haven't felt in years." His words lacerated what little remained of my heart. I wanted to crumple to the floor in anguish, to scream until my throat was raw. But I refused to grant him the satisfaction of seeing me so thoroughly broken. Mustering every ounce of strength, I rose from my chair and headed for the door, grabbing my purse along the way. "Where are you going?" he called after me, the first traces of concern entering his voice. I turned back to face him, my vision blurred with unshed tears. "I'm leaving," I stated, my voice dripping with finality. "And when I get back, you'd better be gone, because I don't even recognize you anymore." Yanking the door open, I stormed out into the night, each step away from my sham of a marriage fortifying my resolve. I had been a fool to believe in the picture-perfect life we had constructed together, but that illusion had finally shattered, irrevocably broken beyond repair. I spent a restless night at a hotel, tears streaming down my face as the full weight of Rowan's betrayal crushed me. How could the man I loved, the man who vowed to cherish me, have so callously thrown away our marriage? The next morning, blinded by hurt but determined to take action, I contacted a private investigator recommended by a friend who had gone through an ugly divorce. Within 24 hours, he had uncovered a sordid trail of evidence that left me shaking with rage and disgust. Rowan hadn't just been having a fling with that vapid interior designer Marcella. The investigator's report revealed multiple affairs spanning over a year, including emails, credit card statements, and dated photos of Rowan entering different hotels with various women. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davies," the investigator said as he laid out the damning dossier on my kitchen table. "Your husband has been quite prolific in his indiscretions." I clenched my fists, fighting back waves of nausea. One name and face in particular leapt out at me. Marcella, the woman whose taunting text had blown the lid off this whole sordid affair. "I want to know everything about her," I told the investigator, my voice hardening with fury. "Wherever she lives, where she works, all of it." 2 days later, he provided me with an address, a swanky apartment in an upscale part of town that I could never have afforded on my own. Rowan must have been funneling money to keep his mistress living in luxury while I stayed at home obliviously. Consumed by a reckless impulse, I drove to Marcella's place, letting myself into the lobby with the temporary code the investigator acquired. Her door was unlocked, the perfect opportunity to corner the woman who had helped decimate my life. I stormed inside, greeted by a lavish interior that instantly confirmed my husband's lover didn't lack for expensive tastes. "Hello?" A silky voice called from another room. "Is that you, Rowan?" I clenched my fists as the lithe, raven-haired seductress glided into view, clad in nothing but a silk robe that clung hungrily to her skin. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. "You!" I spat through gritted teeth. "You're the whore who destroyed my marriage." Rather than having the decency to look ashamed, she arched one perfectly groomed eyebrow as a mocking smirk played across her plump lips. "Well, if it isn't the famous Mrs. Davies, I was wondering when you'd show up to get a good look at the woman your pathetic husband can't resist." White-hot rage engulfed me, and before I could stop myself, my hand lashed out, cracking across her smug face with a resounding slap. She gasped, recoiling in shock, and I felt a savage thrill at having finally wiped that superior look off her face. "You're going to regret that," she hissed, one hand covering her rapidly reddening cheek. "Wait until Rowan hears about this." "Rowan is leaving me for you, isn't he?" I fired back, advancing on her until she backed into the wall. "Well, let me give you a reality check, you home-wrecking snake. He's broke. He's been spending our money on hotels, gifts, this expensive apartment, all to court a little gold-digging tramp like you." Revulsion flickered across her features before her mask of arrogance fell back into place. "We'll see about that," she sneered. "This isn't over, Mrs. Davies. Not by a long shot." I watched in disgust as she slinked away, my desire for vengeance burning hotter than ever before. "No," I thought bitterly as I stormed out. "This is just the beginning." After my explosive showdown with Marcella, I was seething, a volcano of pain and rage that threatened to erupt at any moment. I stormed back home, unable to think of anything but tearing that smug look off the homewrecker's face once and for all. Rowan was already there, having moved his essentials into the guest bedroom at some point during my vengeful errand. His eyes went wide when he saw me storm through the front door. "Alara, what's going on?" he asked, alarmed by the thunderous expression on my face. I didn't bother responding with words. Instead, I flung the damning evidence compiled by the private investigator across the room, letting the printed emails, photos, and financial statements flutter to the floor like confetti. Rowan paled as he scanned the incriminating documents, seemingly comprehending the full depth of his sins for the first time. "You've been having multiple affairs," I stated, keeping my voice dangerously level. "For over a year, by the looks of it. And that's not even the worst part." I held up a different sheaf of papers, these ones detailing the exorbitant sums Rowan had been funneling into a hidden account, no doubt to bankroll his luxurious trysts with his mistresses. "The money, Rowan," I hissed. "How could you steal from our own accounts to wine and dine your whores?" Instead of contrition, anger flickered across his features. He drew himself up to his full height, anger radiating off him. "Don't you dare take that sanctimonious tone with me," he shot back. "You're the one who drove me to this, Alara. Our marriage has been a miserable, lifeless husk for years. Can you really blame me for finally finding happiness elsewhere?" My jaw dropped at the outrageous reversal, my shock quickly hardening into white-hot fury. "Finding happiness?" I echoed in disbelief. "With that home-wrecking bimbo Marcella? She's not some deep, enlightened woman, Rowan. She's a manipulative little gold-digger who's been bleeding you dry." For the first time, doubt crept across his expression. But whatever he thought of my accusation, his stubbornness kept him from acknowledging it. "That's enough," he said coldly. "I want a divorce, Alara. In fact, I already contacted my lawyer to start the process. I'm done with your judgmental nagging and this miserable existence of a marriage." The blunt words pierced what little remained of my heart. I recoiled, feeling the room start to spin around me as the weight of my shattered world came crashing down. Through blurred vision, I could make out Rowan gathering up his belongings and storming out the door without a backward glance. Just like that, it was over. My dreams, my life as I knew it, obliterated in one fell swoop by the man who once vowed to love and cherish me until death did us part. Some vow. Crumpling to the floor amidst the scattered remnants of my marriage, I finally surrendered to the urge to scream, an anguished wail that cleaved through the shell of numbness enveloping me. I screamed until my throat was raw, purging my soul of the trauma that had been inflicted upon it. But as my howls subsided, an uncharacteristic sense of clarity settled over me. Through my bleary gaze, I noticed a familiar rectangular shape peeking out from one of the folders, the deed to our family home, bearing my name and mine alone. In the midst of my father's estate planning years ago, he had insisted on putting the house solely in my ownership, just in case. At the time, I thought his distrust of Rowan was merely a symptom of his cantankerous nature. But now, as the first embers of vengeance kindled in my chest, I gave silent thanks for my father's foresight. I wouldn't be left with nothing after this devastation. No, with the deed secured in my hands, I would strike back and rebuild from the ashes Rowan had strewn around me. If he wanted war, so be it, for I was just getting started. The next few days passed in a blur of anguish and fury. I spent many sleepless nights poring over the files compiled by the private investigator, my eyes burning from the effort of holding back tears. But those tears wouldn't solve anything. Only decisive action would ensure I emerged from this nightmare with my pride and financial security intact. Armed with reams of evidence detailing Rowan's serial infidelity and financial misconduct, I marched into the office of Diane Hastings, one of the most tenacious divorce attorneys in the city. She was a shark in kitten heels, and I would need every ounce of her ferocity. Diane flipped through the documents with a practiced eye, her polished veneer cracking just slightly as she absorbed the lurid details. "Good God," she muttered, removing her glasses to stare at me in disbelief. "I've seen some philandering dirtbags in my time, but your husband is a prime specimen." I managed a weak smile at her candor. "Can you help me, Diane? I want to take him for everything he's worth." A feral grin spread across her lips. "With evidence like this, he won't know what hit him." Over the next few weeks, Diane and I constructed an ironclad strategy to decimate Rowan's finances and hold him accountable for his prolific indiscretions. We would not only freeze any assets he'd stashed away to fund his tawdry second life, but pursue a punishing alimony figure given the extent of his betrayal and financial misdeeds. "This Marcella woman is the key," Diane told me, tapping her pen against a photo of the smarmy homewrecker. "If we can establish that she knowingly carried on an affair with your husband to extract monetary gain, we can pursue her personal assets as well. And trust me, that interior design gig pays for a lot of silicone." My heart raced at the prospect of making Marcella face the same reckoning that Rowan was about to receive. Ever since our venomous confrontation at her apartment, she had slithered out of sight, no doubt waiting for her lover's bottomless wallet to continue funding her lavish lifestyle. Well, she would be in for a rude awakening, just like the scorned wife. In the meantime, Rowan had gone suspiciously silent, no doubt stewing in denial while dreaming of a fresh start with his mistress-turned-fiancé. If only he knew that our once loving relationship was about to mutate into a blood-soaked legal war that would leave him destitute and disgraced. At last, the storm broke when Diane hand-delivered a blitzkrieg of paperwork to Rowan's rented apartment, a motion to freeze all of his assets based on evidence that he had grossly misused marital funds to carry out his affairs. He would have no choice but to limp into court and confront the devastation he'd wrought. The look of abject horror on his face when we met for the first hearing was almost worth enduring his sadistic betrayal. His arrogant mistress was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she'd finally wised up and cut her losses before I dismantled her meal ticket. Rowan's disgraced expression turned to outrage as Diane mercilessly outlined the exhaustive evidence detailing his sordid double life, from bank statements to hotel receipts bearing the names of his mistresses. His lawyer could only sputter impotently, overwhelmed by the scorched earth case we had prepared. "You're making a big mistake," Rowan snarled after the humiliating proceedings, flagging me down in the courthouse lobby. For a fleeting moment, the man I had once loved flickered in his eyes. "Alara, we can stop this. We can work things out, start over." I regarded him with icy disdain as Diane looked on, ready to pounce if he dared to push further. "Did you honestly think I would just slink away and let you ride off into your pathetic second life?" I asked, reveling in the sting of my words. His face hardened, his features twisting into an unrecognizable sneer. "You're going to pay for this, you vindictive bitch." Diane immediately stepped between us, her hand raised in warning. I flashed her a reassuring glance. After everything he'd put me through, his impotent threats bounced off my newfound armor of indifference. "Believe what you want," I said, turning to walk away. "I want you to remember one thing as we proceed forward. You brought this upon yourself, Rowan, and I'm just getting started." In the aftermath of that explosive first hearing, the legal battlefield between Rowan and I devolved into a morass of vicious mudslinging. His lawyers accused me of fabricating evidence, of secretly meeting with other men to manufacture his indiscretions. A rich claim, coming from a man who had been paying for not one, but multiple mistresses over the course of our marriage. I simply steeled myself against the slander, focusing on the righteous fury burning within me every time I thought of his betrayal. Diane assured me these were merely desperate gambits to create smokescreens. "The evidence trail doesn't lie," she stated with sterile confidence. "All we need is for one crack to appear in his sordid facade, then his entire life crumbles." Fate seemed determined to provide me that crack in the most unlikely of ways. While updating the private investigator on the latest legal wrangling, he made an offhand comment that stopped me cold. "That Marcella woman certainly gets around, doesn't she?" I froze, my hand clenching around the phone. "What do you mean by that?" "I've been doing some digging on Miss Perfect," he explained. "Turns out she's not just shacking up with your soon-to-be ex. I have proof she's also entertaining an older, wealthier businessman on the side." White-hot indignation blazed through me at the thought of that smug, silicone-saturated snake pulling the same duplicitous act on multiple men. So much for her claims of being some love-struck victim of circumstance. In that moment, a deliciously devious plan began taking shape in my mind. "Keep looking into this other man," I instructed the investigator. "I need to know everything. Who he is, where they meet. All of it." A devilish grin spread across his weathered features. "You've got a juicy one in mind, don't you, Mrs. Davies?" I matched his expression with one of cold, purposeful resolve. "Marcella thinks she can sink her claws into married men without consequence. It's time she learned how it feels to get a taste of her own medicine." Over the next few weeks, Diane and I worked closely with the investigator to quietly assemble an airtight case confirming Marcella's extracurricular dalliances. We obtained photos of her entering a high-rise luxury condo belonging to business mogul Christopher Woodrow, a 60-something tycoon with a vast empire under his control, and more importantly, an extremely image-conscious wife sitting atop that empire. "You know what they say," Diane mused as we pored over the surveillance stills of Marcella and Mr. Woodrow in decidedly compromising situations. "Mistresses always tell their married lovers that they'd never actually leave their spouse. For a woman like Mrs. Woodrow, learning her husband's side piece has been playing the same brazen game with other wealthy marks. Well, that might just push her over the edge." My eyes gleamed with vengeful anticipation. Marcella would get her sanctimonious, holier-than-thou attitude forcibly readjusted once we went public with her rampant infidelities. If she thought she could sully the sanctity of marriage for her own devious ends, it was time her world came crashing down around her too. And Rowan? Well, when footage emerged of his beloved fiancée cavorting with other wealthy paramours behind his back, any glimmer of sympathy would shrivel within him. The ultimate insult for a man who had risked everything to leave his family behind for her hollow promises of love. They were the perfect marks, both of them consumed with avarice, arrogance, and lust, now mere lambs awaiting the slaughter I was meticulously preparing. By the time I was done, not even the ashes of their bloated egos would remain. After weeks of quietly compiling the damning receipts, photos, and call records, everything was finally in place for my grand counterstrike. I could scarcely contain my eagerness as I dialed the number for Diane's direct line. "It's time," I said, my voice dripping with finality. "Let's burn this whole sordid facade to the ground." The annual Westbridge Charity Gala was the perfect stage for my grand vengeance. A swanky, high-profile event frequented by the city's elite upper crust, including Rowan and his precious Marcella, who would no doubt be reveling in their freshly minted reputations as a glamorous power couple rising from the ashes of my failed marriage. Little did those two arrogant fools suspect that their entire sham of a relationship was about to detonate in front of all their well-heeled peers. No amount of public niceties or honeyed lies would insulate them from the reckoning I had meticulously orchestrated. When Diane and I arrived at the lavish Westbridge Hotel ballroom, our eyes scanned the glittering crowd for our intended targets. Sure enough, there was Marcella draped over Rowan like a sleek, overpriced trophy, her skin-tight scarlet dress leaving almost nothing to the imagination. Eyes on the prize, Diane muttered in my ear, as I felt a pang of disgust and pity for the man I once loved. It's showtime. Our preparation had been perfect. While mingling among the city's elite under the guise of donor solicitations, I slipped Diane's assistant the incendiary photos and videos we had compiled of Marcella's rampant infidelities. Our evidence bombshell was ready to detonate. Within minutes, the first whispers began rippling through the crowd like wildfire. All around us, guests gasped and pointed iPhones as the undercover, salacious shots of Marcella cavorting with her elderly tycoon lover went viral. Someone must have recognized the infamous Christopher Woodrow. The cheating scandal quickly took on a life of its own, spreading like a plume of radioactive gossip. Diane and I feigned innocence as partygoers gaped in scandalized rapture. But from the corner of my eye, I glimpsed Marcella's face draining of color before her gaze met mine across the ballroom. Her painted lips contorted in rage, finally connecting the dots of who was responsible for her spectacular public unraveling. Bingo. Just then a sleek ivory shoe appeared at the edge of my vision. I followed the impossibly toned leg attached to it all the way up to the stunningly furious face of Miranda Woodrow, Christopher's scorned, ultra-affluent wife. "You cosseted little whore?" she snarled, spit flying as she seized Marcella by her expensively coiffed hair. "Did you really think you could keep making a fool of me behind my back?" With that, Miranda violently wrenched Marcella around to face the crowd, ripping the front of her dress open in a shower of sequins and exposing her artificially enhanced assets to the entire gala audience. Marcella shrieked as camera flashes erupted like strobe lights, her arms frantically crossing to cover herself. My eyes darted across the room to find Rowan staring slack-jawed at his disgraced fiancée, a nauseating mixture of shock and self-pity etched across his features. I watched with perverse satisfaction as comprehension dawned on his malleable face. Marcella had merely been using him as another wealthy plaything to bankroll her lavish needs. What a perfect poetic justice, that the two people most responsible for nuking my life from orbit were now facing the same brutal humiliation on the grandest stage imaginable. As Marcella finally broke free from Miranda's clutches and fled the ballroom in hysterics, Rowan turned toward me with a haunted, soulless stare. Our eyes met across the crowd of aghast guests, and in that moment, I allowed the full force of my vindication to blaze across my expression. "You did this to yourself." I mouthed the words for his benefit, letting their implication linger like the pungent aroma of schadenfreude wafting through the air. His jaw clenched as he gave the briefest of nods, a reluctant admission that I had indeed exacted the ultimate retribution from my former life. With that, he turned and stalked away from the gala through a quickly forming void in the crowd, leaving utter debasement and ruin in his wake. I sipped my champagne, allowing the delicious moment to linger on my tongue as Diane materialized at my side. "Well, Mrs. Davies," she murmured with a proud smile, "I do believe this evening has been a full and resounding success, don't you?" A savage grin stretched across my face as I surveyed the catastrophic scene my vengeance had wrought. "You don't know the half of it," I replied, "but I have a feeling this is just the beginning of something beautiful." In the aftermath of the Westbridge Gala calamity, Rowan did what any disgraced, recently humbled man would do. He came slinking back with his tail between his legs, begging for mercy. I'll admit, seeing him reduced to a shell of his formerly arrogant self provided a wicked sort of satisfaction. Gone was the cocksure bravado, the unearned superiority and callous indifference to my pain. Now, sitting across the table from me in Diane's office, he looked more like a kicked stray than my husband of 6 years. "Alara," he croaked as I eyed him with unconcealed disdain, I don't know what to say. What happened with Marcella? God, I was such a fool." I said nothing, letting the silence fester until he visibly squirmed under my pitiless glare. I know I can never take back all the hurt I caused you, he continued, shamefaced. But I'm begging you, from the bottom of my heart, please, give me one more chance. Let me make things right between us. A harsh bark of laughter escaped my lips before I could stop it. Make things right? I echoed incredulously. Rowan, you cheated on me repeatedly with multiple women over the course of our marriage. You funneled money, you lied, you manipulated me at every turn. What on earth makes you think you deserve a second chance at anything from me? His eyes went wide, realizing the magnitude of his transgressions for perhaps the first time. I was destroyed when I saw you with Marcella, he stammered. She was just using me, like some pathetic meal ticket to bankroll her lifestyle. When that footage got out, I realized how blind I'd been, how terribly I failed you as a husband by letting my lust spiral so completely out of control. I regarded him stonily, refusing to let his carefully rehearsed pangs of remorse disarm me. Not after watching him callously tear my life asunder in pursuit of temporary pleasures. Do you have any idea how it felt? I asked, my voice low and menacing. To have the man I loved, the man I built a life and future with, not only betray me, but humiliate me in the vilest way possible over and over again. To learn that you had cast me aside like some meaningless burden in favor of chasing disgusting trysts with interchangeable whores? Rowan visibly wilted as the weight of his sins settled over him in palpable waves. I could see the self-loathing and regret contorting his features into a pathetic mask of shame. Good. He was finally getting a taste of the anguish he had so blithely inflicted upon me. I was a monster, he said hoarsely. A selfish, vile monster who didn't deserve an ounce of your unconditional love. I don't expect your forgiveness, Alara. I just hope I can make amends somehow. Even if it takes giving you every last penny I have. Anything to stop being this despicable person I became. Revulsion churned in my gut as his sniveling pleas washed over me. As much as I longed to revel in his suffering, the thought of indulging his desire for penance turned my stomach. I was no longer the malleable, naive woman he married. I would never allow him to manipulate me through feigned contrition ever again. Rising to my feet, I looked him dead in the eye and saw the faint glimmer of hope that I might offer him the absolution he suddenly craved. That glimmer was immediately extinguished by my next words. I don't want your money, Rowan. I want your absence from my life. He flinched as if struck, his hangdog expression melting into one of naked shock. You mean... Don't play dumb, I snapped, resisting the urge to slap that look off his traitorous face. After everything you've done, every line you blithely crossed with your tawdry indiscretions, do you really think I would be naive enough to let you wriggle back into my life? But Alara, But nothing, I seethed, leaning across the table until I was mere inches from his pathetic countenance. If you agree to these terms right here, right now, I'll ensure this divorce is over swiftly and you can slink off into whatever debauched second act you have planned. But you will never, and I mean never, ask for my forgiveness or understanding. Do you hear me? You lost that right the second you started using our marriage vows as toilet paper. Rowan could only gape soundlessly, seemingly grasping for words that wouldn't come. Diane placed the paperwork on the table between us, offering a phantom of a nod. Your choice, Mr. Davies, she intoned, the rows of tiny font suddenly looming larger than life. You can either dig your heels in further, or accept these very generous terms and grant Mrs. Davies the peace of mind she deserves to move on once and for all. The silence stretched out like an eternity as I watched the kaleidoscope of emotion flicker across his face. Indignation, shame, bitter acceptance. Finally, with a grunt of resignation, he snatched up the pen and scrawled his name across the dotted line, cementing our divorce into inevitability. Our eyes met one final time, and I allowed the ghost of a triumphant smile to crease my lips at his chastened expression. You'll never hear from me again after this, he said through gritted teeth. But I hope you find the peace you're looking for, Alara. You deserve far better than the depraved bastard I became. With that parting remark, he turned and strode out of the office, the leaden weight of his failure dogging each dejected step. I watched until his retreating back disappeared down the hallway, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was finally over. The man who once meant everything to me was now expunged from my life like a cancer. I could at long last close that sordid book and prepare to move forward into my new reality, one of my own creation, shaped by the venom of his actions. Diane placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, her customary shark-like grin softening at the edges. "You did it," she murmured. "You reclaimed your power and dignity. I've never seen a woman rise from the ashes like you have." I returned her smile, the promise of untold possibilities glimmering on the horizon. "This was only the beginning," I said resolutely. "My rebirth starts now." 6 months after Rowan's bitter departure from my life, the ink was finally dry on our divorce settlement. Thanks to Diane's tenacious legal wrangling, I emerged from the ashes of my shattered marriage with the lion's share of our formerly shared assets, including the deed to our family home, where I could begin anew. As part of the agreement, Rowan was legally prohibited from attempting to contact me. Not that he would have anyway. The last I'd heard through the grapevine, he had slunk off to lick his wounds from the scandal, living in quiet shame after our explosive downfall shredded his reputation. I couldn't say I derived any joy from seeing him laid so low. My focus was solely on myself now, on embracing the new chapter stretching out before me. Still, there was a certain cathartic release in knowing the man who tried to destroy me had been rendered just as devastated. The papers had certainly enjoyed dissecting every lurid angle of our divorce saga. The headlines blared about the scorned wife who outlasted her cheating husband and the rise of a new divorcee warrior queen. While slightly crass, I couldn't deny the grim amusement I felt at being rebranded a folk hero by divorces vicariously living through my vengeance. It was a strange feeling, but not entirely unwelcome after the trauma Rowan had inflicted. I refused to wallow in victimhood. My new life would be one of strength, resilience, and creating something positive from the ashes he left in his wake. Which was why, nearly 3 months after the official divorce was finalized, I hosted an intimate gala of my own in the ballroom of Westbridge Hotel, the site of Marcella's ultimate downfall all those months ago. Around me, the city's elite and affluent mingled amidst towering centerpieces of fresh roses, while a string quartet provided refined ambiance. Only this time, there would be no sordid scandals or uncovered affairs to upstage my event. No, this gathering was the inaugural fundraiser for my namesake foundation, Alara's Light, devoted to supporting women who had survived the betrayal of infidelity and emerged stronger for their resilience. My speech that night drew thunderous applause from the well-heeled crowd as I outlined the organization's mission to provide counseling, legal aid, and financial assistance to struggling divorcees in need. A portion of the millions I had secured from Rowan would seed my foundation's crucial early days. "No woman should ever feel helpless in the wake of a spouse's betrayal," I proclaimed from the podium, scanning the rapt audience with rejuvenated poise. "With compassion and community, we can help uplift lives from the devastation and allow them to flourish anew, just as I was empowered to do in my own journey." After the remarks concluded, a line quickly formed of well-wishers and prospective donors eager to pledge support to my cause. I greeted each one with a warm smile, my heart swelling with pride and purpose. Who could have fathomed that this dignified, self-assured woman holding court over a throng of admirers was the same broken soul lying shattered on her kitchen floor only a year ago? The transformation was nothing short of a miracle, a raw testament to the power of cunning, resolve, and the merciless pursuit of justice. I was so invigorated by the night's success that I barely registered the presence of a newcomer waiting patiently at the back of the well-wisher line. He was a trim, handsome man in his early 40s, with striking hazel eyes that gleamed with an unmistakable hint of admiration. "Mrs. Davies," he said warmly as his turn arrived, his voice carrying the faintest lilt of a British accent. "I must commend you on such a worthy and impactful mission. Your story of overcoming such unthinkable heartbreak is nothing short of inspiring." I arched an eyebrow, intrigued despite myself by his effusive praise and polished demeanor. Up close I could make out the slim-fitted tuxedo and coiffed sandy hair that definitely belonged to a man of considerable means. "You're too kind, Mr. Douglas," he supplied with a roguish smile. "Nigel Douglas. A good friend of Christopher Woodrow's, actually. though I suspect we travel in rather different circles these days after his personal unpleasantness. My lips twitched in amusement at his deft understatement. Of course, the humiliating affair between Marcella and Christopher Woodrow had irreparably nuked the tycoon's marriage and reputation. Nigel was no doubt alluding to having cut ties with the disgraced mogul in the aftermath. "I'm a journalist by trade," he went on, seemingly emboldened by my bemused expression, "though my true passion has always been amplifying stories just like yours, of courage, perseverance, and the remarkable resilience of the indomitable human spirit." My heart fluttered as our gazes remained locked, a tantalizing electric charge seeming to crackle between us. This Nigel Douglas was certainly full of dashing charm, not to mention being rather easier on the eyes than I'd grown accustomed to in recent years. "Well, Mr. Douglas," I said, extending my hand as a coy smile played across my lips, "if the spirit truly does move you, perhaps you'd allow me to give you a more intimate account of my trials over a drink sometime soon?" His grip was warm and confident as he accepted the proffered handshake, holding it perhaps a touch longer than necessary. "I would be utterly delighted, Mrs. Davies, more than you could possibly know." As I watched him depart through the twinkling crowd of socialites, I felt a giddy spark of excitement that had long eluded me, the thrill of new possibilities and a future unshackled from the trauma of the past. The crushing weight of Rowan's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but by the alchemy of my own iron resolve, I had spun that devastation into abject triumph. The future was finally mine to craft anew, on my own terms. And this radiant night under Westbridge's glittering chandeliers was merely the first mingling rays of the new dawn I had clawed back into existence. No longer a victim, but a victor, reborn from the ashes of my former life.